G's, all the sun on my jacket. Work hard, now I'm changing my bracket. Talk tough, we ain't hearing that racket. Dogs came in, you know how to stack it. Don't take it wrong, but I'ma need my ends though. I got tigers on my chest like Kenzo. Rail came, yeah, he putting that Benz though. Carol's here, man, you know he stay 10 toes. Big dog, man, you know I ain't worried. Bent up, so I'm talking real slurry. Got a blast, bro.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This is Adam Caplan, the voice in your ears with AC Radio. We've got an action-packed show today. We're covering Bellator 290, Ryan Bader, the Bellator heavyweight champion, versus Fedor Emelianenko, the last emperor. Then we're going to get to the Ultimate Fighter, Mcgregor versus Chandler. And then after that, we're going to get into Islam Makhachev versus my guy, Alex Volkanovski. And then the co-main event, Josh Emmett versus Yair Rodriguez. So let's get right into it because, you know, last night or Saturday night at Bellator 290, we saw Ryan Bader, who had one of the great nicknames of our time, Darth Bader, which was a little bit funny because I think back in the day, you know, the teenager in me would have thought that if Ryan's nickname was Master Bader, it would have been a lot funnier. But anyways, you know, we had him getting in there against Fedor Emelianenko in his last fight of his career. You know, for a lot of the folks that tune in, I don't think that they really even know the lineage and the career of Fedor Emelianenko. And what I mean by that is like, he was a pride destroyer. Okay. And Pride got bought out by Zuffa. And, you know, basically most of the contracts were a little bit fickle and more or less Pride had blown up. And now we have Rizin. But I don't think that Rizin develops the same product due to not having the same roster and the same character that Pride once had. But you know, Saturday night, Scott Coker had the ability to give Fedor Emelianenko his last fight against Ryan Bader, the heavyweight champion. And, you know, usually I get on here on AC Radio and I get down on the fact that some of these legends get tough matchups in their last fights. You know, you had me ranting on Shogun. You had me ranting on Frankie Edgar. I believe there was one or two more in there, and there's many more. But, you know, one of those things that I really love to see was the fact that Fedor had the chance to win the heavyweight title in his last fight against Ryan Bader. And that's a tough guy to fight. I mean, Ryan Bader was I believe he was an all-American wrestler, maybe even a national champion at Arizona State University. He's been a staple of Arizona mixed martial arts for a very long time. I would say, you know, he was part of the original growth of mixed martial arts in Arizona, whereas a guy like Sugar Sean is now taking it and running it to the end zone. And then we got Fedor Emelianenko. I mean, the pride of Russia, even the pride of Japan, such a stoic, a guy that we never got to see in the UFC due to all of the negotiations. We would have loved to see Fedor versus Brock Lesnar or Randy Couture, but you know, the whole M1 Global wanting to have a piece of the pie in the contract of Fedor Emelianenko joining the UFC did indeed make it complicated. And you know what? I think in hindsight, Fedor did in fact do the right thing because the whole goal was to bring Fedor to the UFC to have him lose. There ain't no fucking way that Dana would have wanted to see him win. Fedor was one of those guys like a Ben Askren, you know, who they brought over to the UFC in hopes of seeing him get his ass kicked. And, you know, I don't know what would have happened then. So on Saturday night, unfortunately, Ryan Bader's wrestling was definitely the reason why Fedor Emelianenko couldn't get himself up from the mat to utilize his striking, his explosive right hand and his left hook. Ryan kept him down. You know, handcuffed that right hand pretty well, or that left hand, and just rained down punches in the ground and pound. It was a similar loss to Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson kind of beat Fedor the same way that Ryan Bader did, except that Dan, with that big Hendo bomb, was able to have Fedor flattened out on his face, knocked out, whereas Ryan wasn't able to. But at the end of the day, this is a huge win for Ryan Bader. I mean, at the end of the day, to have Fedor Emelianenko in his last fight as a feather in your cap to your career is a great, great accomplishment and a big, big deal. We hate to see legends like Fedor go out like that, but you kind of got to think that when you're fighting a guy like Ryan Bader, who's had an emphatic Bellator career, you know, because you got to think that after the John Jones loss between Bader and Jones back in the day, to now bringing it forward to being a two-time champ for Bellator, making good money, maybe not always being the most active in the heavyweight department, but overall a great champion and a great career. You got to be happy for a guy like Ryan Bader too. Always one of the good guys in MMA. a stand-up guy, never did anything wrong behind the scenes. He's got a great look to him. He's a good wrestler, likes to utilize his striking as well. And he also won the Ultimate Fighter in one of the most exciting seasons when it was Frank Mir versus Antonio Nogueira, Big Nog, my other guy. So, you know, that I got to say, like, Ryan Bader, if you're going to go out on your career, yeah, okay, Frankie Edgar losing to Chris Gutierrez, fuck that. That fight should have never happened. Shogun versus a Ukrainian guy that ain't nobody remember his name, fuck that. It shouldn't have happened. But Fedor versus Ryan Bader, I could get down with it. So all I'm saying is that some of the folks that have only gotten in here during the pandemic game need to look back into the Pride days, because that was a crazy, crazy time in mixed martial arts. Kevin Randleman was his name. He got spiked, Fedor Emelianenko, on his neck by Kevin Randleman. It looked to seem as if Randleman was finally going to get a victory over the great Emelianenko, but who came back and won that fight? Fedor, because he's a stoic, he's a beast, and that is one guy that back in the day and in his prime, he was easily the most feared fighter that has ever walked the earth. Guaranteed. You could put your fucking name on that. Why? Because he didn't do his talking outside of the ring. He only did it in the ring. And that was a big, big deal. And remember, in those Pride days, the first round was 10 minutes, and then the second round was 2. And if you weren't active, you got yellow cards. So the only thing that you needed to do was provide chaos and always looking to finish. So again, congratulations. And one thing I want to touch up on is a legendary photo on Saturday night that Scott Coker put on for Bellator. Renzo Gracie, Rampage Jackson, Chael Sonnen, Royce Gracie, Chuck Liddell, Fedor Emelianenko. We got Matt Hughes, Josh Barnett. We've got Randy Couture, Mark Coleman, and I believe it's Frank Shamrock, and then Scott Coker. And you got to think, Dana White could never have a photo like this. He could never have a photo like this in the octagon. Why? Because he's burned so many bridges with the likes of some of those guys in the octagon. And a lot of those guys have spilled blood, sweat, and tears and part of their brains for the company of the UFC. And by the way that those contracts went out, they now don't have that type of relationship with the UFC. And it's sad to see that the UFC was the company in Zuffa that bought over Pride and a lot of these contracts, and then bought over Strikeforce and a lot of these contracts. And most of these guys aren't even in the stands today of UFC fights. You got a guy like Randy Couture who's got a terrible relationship with the UFC. You got a guy like Chuck Liddell that the second Endeavor came in the picture, they said, what are we paying Chuck Liddell and Matt Hughes for? Cut these guys. They were dear friends of Dana White. And that was the beginning of showing that Dana doesn't necessarily have as much control as we think. So congrats to Scott Coker, who mends those relationships and shows gratitude and respect to the real legends of mixed martial arts. Because the guys that we're watching today are not the legends. The legends of mixed martial arts are the guys that you had to run to Blockbuster for to rent the fucking event. And all my real OGs know out there what it's like watching UFC in 2004 and 5 and 6 and 7 when your mom drove you to Blockbuster so you could go and get a DVD, because that's what that photo is all about. And a lot of the people that are watching here have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about. Why? Because they haven't been in the game as long as the boy AC. So on that note, we're going to get to the next segment in the Ultimate Fighter, because we got Michael Chandler stepping up against Conor Mcgregor. And I am so happy about this. Why? Because a lot of folks were thinking that it was going to be Tony Ferguson. But I don't think Tony was the guy. I think that it would have been the guy for maybe a soundbite sense. But let's be real here. Michael Chandler versus Conor McGregor reminds me of like a Rampage versus Rashad season. You know, Rampage Jackson, very similar to the Conor McGregor in the sense of cocky, brash. He's got the knockout punches. He's the beast from the East. He's the guy, or the beast from the South. If you're from Memphis, Tennessee, at Rampage Jackson, you know. And then you got Rashad Evans, more similar to a Michael Chandler in the sense that more soft-spoken, more well-spoken, in some ways could be more articulate, but more importantly, you know, a wrestler, a more well-rounded fighter. And, you know, even Rashad back in the day, like Chandler, has those cringy moments on the mic. It's sometimes hard to get behind them, but I firmly believe that The Ultimate Fighter is a great way to reinvigorate the career of Michael Chandler. And I'm not saying his career is in the dust. What I mean is a lot of fans are on his ass due to the fact that he's been going to war and he's not coming out with his hand raised. Now, getting the opportunity to watch him coach and inspire and motivate and direct these athletes into the right directions, you know, is going to be a really cool thing to see. Michael Chandler is an insightful person. He's always one of the hardest workers in the room. And to be able to pass that on to these guys and as us as fans to watch this and absorb this, I think it's going to be really motivating. I think that Michael Chandler is going to bring a beautiful lens in the coaching room. And I think it's going to give fans more appreciation of Michael Chandler and of the sport of MMA. Because I think that people don't realize that Michael Chandler has unfortunately sacrificed himself for bigger paydays and for the entertainment of the company. I think that we all know that Michael Chandler could take the smartest path to victory. But, I mean, you know, that's not what happens when you know the company is going to pay you more for putting your balls on the line, win or lose. So I think that this is an opportunity to show Michael Chandler in a really, really good light, and I'm looking forward to that. And then on the other end of Conor McGregor, listen, man, the guy's been away from the sport for a long time. There are steroid allegations. There are lawsuits coming against him. People are upset about the inactivity. This is a way to kind of repaint him in that light. But which Conor do we see? Do we see Conor in Abu Dhabi versus Dustin Poirier #2, which is too nice? Do we see Conor McGregor against Khabib, which was indigestible, exhausting, annoying? It was obvious he was intoxicated. Or do we get the Conor McGregor that we know and love? The Conor McGregor that goes out there, calls his shot, trains hard, keeps his head in the game, and dedicates his life to mixed martial arts and in the fighters that he's going to coach. Which one do we get? And I think the mystery box in Conor McGregor is another reason why I think having him coaching as an Ultimate Fighter coach is a genius fucking move. And a lot of folks out there are saying Dana White's Contender Series is a better product and no. Like I talk about Jake Paul, y'all still going to be tuning in though. Still going to be tuning in. So what's the problem here? So I'm looking forward to it. Michael Chandler versus Conor McGregor. But the only issue that we have is Conor has not entered the USADA testing pool yet. And the man is thicker than a gorilla right now. And you have to be in the testing pool for, I believe, 6 to 8 months and 2 negative tests, I believe, for steroids. You know, so when's he going to get in there? And the longer this takes, if the fight doesn't happen in 2023, it is going to put a blemish on Conor McGregor's career, and people are going to be very upset with him. So he better get his ass in that testing pool very soon, because that fight needs to happen by 2023. We're in February right now. If he doesn't enter, I don't know, April, whatever it is, I don't need to calculate. Conor McGregor, like Daniel Cormier once said, get your shit together. So that's all I got for you there. I'm looking forward to that. I think it's going to be a great series. It's going to be in May. I think it's going to be a lightweight division, but I'll be real with you. I would just do the heavyweights. Would love to see fucking Michael Chandler and Conor McGregor coaching heavyweights. I think it would be so cool to see. And I think it would add a different dynamic and entertainment in knowing that a 5'9" Conor McGregor is telling a 6'5" guy to step his fucking game up. So I would love to see that, but it'll probably be a lightweight series. And let me know in the comments what you think. If you're burnt out with The Ultimate Fighter, I get it, but look past that. Look at the positives here. So I'm going to take a sip of that Coors because it's kosher. And then we're going to get to UFC 284, one of the events that, you know, getting a lot of flack from Dana White, that it's not getting enough push, it's not getting enough press. He's focusing on Power Slap and UFC with John Jones and Gane and Israel Adesanya and Pereira and Conor McGregor and Chandler. But here we are in Perth, Australia. We have Alex Volkanovski, the UFC featherweight undisputed champion, versus the undisputed lightweight champion in Islam Makhachev, Khabib Nurmagomedov's protege. And I'm looking forward to this fight. Why? Because it's always nice to see an opportunity for a fighter in the UFC to become a double champ. one of the things is that since Alex Volkanovski is moving up in weight, and he is, quite a small featherweight, but a dense one at that, it'll be interesting to see how he fares against a guy like Islam Makhachev. But, I think the real story here is, will Islam Makhachev be another unstoppable force that we saw time and time again in Khabib Nurmagomedov? I mean, I can't get past the fact that we were talking about Charles Oliveira's jiu-jitsu as if he was Gordon Ryan or Royce Gracie. And then the next thing you know, okay, Charles got tagged by a big shot by Islam, but at the end of the day, he passed he passed his guard like butter. He already set up the head and arm choke in side control, in half guard, sorry. He already had the head and arm choke in half guard, and before he even leaped over to side control, Charles Oliveira's already tapping. So, I don't know. This is very hard for me not to see how Islam Makhachev doesn't remain patient on the feet like he has been with his boxing. And then, once Alex makes a mistake, he looks for that takedown to then lock him up. And I could see how a guillotine or a head and arm choke or a rear naked choke is the way to beat Alex Volkanovski. I don't think you're going to beat him by armbar. I don't think you're going to beat him by triangle. I think that the best way that Islam Makhachev could win this fight is obviously sticking to what he's been doing. Staying conservative on the boxing while still trying to take a few risks, but more importantly, using that boxing to suck in a great striker in Alex Volkanovski to make a mistake so that Islam could then go to his grappling, look for that grapevine, and then, look for Volkanovski to maybe turn over or make a mistake for Islam to then sink in a choke. Or maybe Volkanovski takes more of a conservative route and remains calm in that grapevine and then lets Islam, like a snake, climb up him to then look to get that head and arm choke. So that to me is such a difficult one. But then on the flip side, we have Alexander the Great Volkanovski, a guy who was a heavyweight at one point because he was a National Rugby League player. He has the bone density and the muscular strength of a heavyweight, but he's a compact 145 pounder, and it is showed time and time again against the likes of Max Holloway, and it's shown time and time again against Chan Sung Jung and Brian Ortega. You know what I'm saying? So it's a big fight here. Alex Volkanovski has great striking. He has unlimited cardio, always looks to finish his strikes with the leg kicks, is a national champion in Australian wrestling as well, so he's no stranger to wrestling. But again, it's hard to use the grappling as an argument. I know that Charlie is nowhere near the wrestling capability of Alex Volkanovski, but he is in the jiu-jitsu department, and he got submitted. Plus, Charles Oliveira is way bigger than Islam, whereas Volkanovski is smaller, at least in height. So, Volkanovski is just a great striker with an undeniable heart. I don't see any way where even if Alex loses, that he actually loses. The fact of the career that Alex Volkanovski has had, the fact that he is having this opportunity in Australia against Islam Makhachev is a W in itself. And I know, here's AC giving the participation ribbon, but we really need to understand the magnitude of this fight. You know what I'm saying? This is very different than Conor McGregor going up from 145 to 155 to fight Eddie Alvarez. This is very, very different. Conor went up against Eddie because the matchup was far more favorable. Alex Volkanovski is running up to the fucking dragon with the 155-pound belt around his waist with a sword in his hand, ready to get vengeance against Islam Makhachev, ready to put a stamp on ending the legacy of the great Dagestanis in the UFC. And I don't know if he's going to get there, but you best believe that the heart, the courageousness, and the tenacity, and then you link in the wrestling capabilities, the Muay Thai and the kickboxing, and then one of the greatest fundamentals to have in mixed martial arts, being able to tie in the grappling with the striking. One of the biggest differences that we see in some of the great fighters like John Jones, George St. Pierre, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Demetrius Johnson, Anderson Silva, some of the greats like that, Alex Volkanovski stands there with him. So I'm looking forward to this fight. Comment below who you got. UFC 284. Stay tuned for the recap as well, because I'm always looking forward to recapping that one. I know I was getting to Yair and Emmett, but I got to say, that was some hot fire, and we're going to end it on that one. AC Radio, we're out, baby.
Cheese, no design on my jacket. Work hard, now I'm changing my bracket. Talk tough, we ain't hear that racket. Dogs came in, you know how to stack it. Take it wrong, but I'ma need my ends though. I got tigers on my chest like Kenzo. Rail came, yeah, he putting that Benz though. Carrots here, man, you know he stay 10 toes. Big dog, man, you know I ain't worried. Bent